I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on the 69 Charger, and we're gonna be doing the firewall, the cowl panel, the lower cowl panel, the upper cowl panel, the side front door jamb structure, and really this whole section of this B-body. We are also gonna reinstall the mini tubs. If you saw the last video, the mini tubs were set in this car. We did cut them out off camera. I showed the process on how I basically cut the lip, move them over, but we'll go ahead and get the mini tubs now that they're being completely test fit in the car and they were just tacked up underneath just in case there's any issues. I could have cut them. We'll get them completely welded up, spot weld, installed in the car. We still will not weld them permanently until we put the quarter panels on, so that will be another couple videos down the road just to make sure the clocking's right on them on the quarter panel. But we'll go and get them screwed in place, and we'll probably get the trunk drop-offs on this car. So that will be this whole video. We spent all day today sandblasting all the parts. That's what we've done on everything on this Charger, is every part. If you go back and watch the previous video, most of this is all brand new metal except this upper frame structure. And you could see actually since the last video, we did remove our door jambs. You go back and watch it. We had some rusted door jambs on both sides of this car, and what we were doing, we were using them to mock up the floor pans, the rocker panels, and just make sure everything was set off the factory car. Since then, we did cut them off. I did make some reference points where I know how far and the angle that the door jambs are going to sit, because they obviously do not sit exactly straight. We have some notches in the bottom, basically our cheat sheet on how to put this car together, how it was. So we'll get those put together. On that note, everything on this car already has been test fit into Eco on the parts that we are going to install. So realistically, if you watch this video now, like I said, we just got done wrapping up the sandblasting. We'll probably start this install first thing in the morning. But if it does go together real smooth and you don't see any issues, just be aware that it is not the first time that the car has been together. We have certain screw alignment marks taken in place that I can kind of go right to as reference marks. And like I said, they were based off the measurements on the original car. All that was also based on initially fit up there with the floor pans when we were doing the floor pans off the original pieces. So stay tuned. Let's get working. Let's get this section of this B-body Charger together, the firewall and the cowl panels and stuff. And like I said, we'll kind of wrap up on the back end. Everything will be in weld-through primer on the coming out of the sandblast cabinet. And then when it's done, we'll do what we did on other videos and shoot everything in epoxy primer right on the bare metal to protect it. So let's get some work done.
So I said the first step on what we're going to do is we are going to install the mini tubs and weld them together. So what makes this a mini tub is the inner wheelhouse is 3 inches wider than a factory wheelhouse would have been. And that's what we had to do when we cut the Charger trunk pan to make clearance for that. What's nice about these B-bodies is we don't have to cut the frame rails or anything else. It's just the floor, the trunk pan itself and the rear seat pan. So putting this part on these cars, you know, some of these kits with the mini tubs, you have to weld the inner wheel weld and you add a strip in there. You can do that and just add your own strip and make your own mini tub wheelhouses. But with this one, they do sell a 3-inch wider mini tub. So the installation on the outer wheelhouse to the mini tub would be the same exact as it would have been from the outer wheelhouse to a factory stock inner wheelhouse. So what we do, we put them in the car, we test fit, everything went really well. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to take the spot welder and go around the where you would put your MIG rosette welds. What I also like to do on this video is I did tack this area before we did do any spot welding on the outside, and I do like to come back through and just completely MIG weld the whole seam up. I feel like it stops water and everything and stops rust coming from the backside of these wheelhouses. You know, usually seam sealers in this area, and a lot of times I think water can be trapped in the seam sealer and, you know, really seep into those areas and rust very well. So I just think a good solid MIG bead weld, one, is going to make it a lot stronger and a lot more durable, and it's going to really prevent rust down the road. And then what you're going to do, you'll go ahead and put seam sealer back on over the welds that we've done, and that's just extra protection there. So it's what would have been done from the factory. With this owner, obviously with the mini tubs, we're not going with a 100% factory look on this charger, so he'll probably go ahead in there and then run just a little bit of seam sealer with his finger, or a tool, just to make it really clean in there and just not done like the factory, just smeared all over the place. So again, that's far down the road, but just some ideas on how to clean this up and make this look really good when you're looking inside this car. And then you have options of, the undercoating under there, or you could just paint it factory color or just black it out. There's so many different options to do, but like I said, I think the welding is the first step on just really strengthening up and then really helping the rust protection. So what we're going to do now, obviously I'm installing the mini tubs back into the car. Hopefully this will be the last time, but like I said, since we welded the mini tubs together, I added weld through primer both on the inside and outside everywhere, just because so many different things weld to these mini tubs. We'll go ahead and add weld through primer to the whole thing to stop rust prevention, just in case we can't get in certain areas. Then what we'll go ahead and do is down the road, after when we go to test fit the outer sheet metal, quarter panels, Dutchman panel, tail panel, everything will be test fit on the rear of this car. We'll get everything adjusted right, making sure the wheel houses are clocked, tilted down, tilted up, they match with the quarter panels. If I know everything there is good, then we can come back through, weld all this inner structure up finally, and then we can go ahead and sand down all the weld through primer there. That stuff comes off a whole lot easier than the e-coat, and especially the epoxy primer. So those are screwed into place on the car where I think they're going to go. Hopefully that's the last time, but we have the option to adjust them down the road. They shouldn't have to come completely out of the car. It's going to be just an idea of just turning them with the quarter panels on the car. So we're going to turn our attentions to the front door hinge, post, jambs, and the side cowl panels for this charger. So you could see this almost goes together as one solid piece. So the door hinge post goes on the rocker. We made a mark on the bottom. We have our reference mark on our top jig pieces, and you can see that we cut the old hinge pieces off. With the A-pillars, I made extra bracing holding the A-pillars on, so that's now holding the whole front of the car where nothing has moved. You can see I'll put my door hinge piece in first, then we can slide our cowl right behind it. All these holes are pre-drilled. We could have got in here with the spot welder on certain things. I just thought it was easier versus trying to play around with on what we can and what we can't get. Just put our MIG rosette holes, knowing where we can, especially in the bottom rocker area. You can see we can only get the side cowl panel from the inside of the car, so that's drilling through 2 holes on the inner rocker piece. So I really didn't want to use a spot welder there, just to make sure we got a really strong, good weld. I could just MIG right through that. You could see the areas going down the hinge pillar. All those were done with the rosette holes. I did trace them out, knowing exactly where they were going to go. Again, all these parts are being put back on this car exactly where they were removed, and we are happy with them. So I am taking my reference marks on my hinge post on where they're going to go front to back. Once we're happy with both of them, they're clamped to our jig pieces exactly where the original rusted out ones were. Now that we're done with that, you can see we are going to test fit and final fit the firewall in place. All this, just like all the other parts, have been completely sandblasted down. I did add just weld through primer in the areas that we know we have to go back through and weld. Everything else we're leaving in bare metal. Also on the bare metal part, we are not going to leave these parts sit for a while. I've said this on other videos. As soon as we get these parts in bare metal, we're round robbing and going full force on these cars to just get them in epoxy primer in a couple days max. So like I said, this whole build would have been like 2.5 days with epoxy primer and everything from start to finish, with all the welding, prep time, and everything else. So we do the sandblasting, and then we jump right on full force on the welding, the assembly, and everything else until we get the car in epoxy primer. So with the firewall, you can see I am using the monkey on the stick. These firewalls, they do fit great once you start really pushing them around a little bit, I see horror stories online where people are saying how bad these parts fit and everything else, but then your car is sitting with two frame rails, two jack stands under the two frame rails looking like this car, and there's nothing to jack off, there's nothing to push against. And you know, that's where the parts do have a hard time fitting. I feel like with the monkey on the stick working on and off the frame jig where other parts of the car are held down, we can manipulate the firewall, we can push it down and follow the floor pan seam perfect. You can see I use an abundance of clamps, they're everywhere, and then once we're done, we'll start in the center of the firewall, and I'm going to use the spot welder on this part. Obviously clean metal on the floor, clean metal on the firewall. We have these perfect attachment to go right through and just spot weld everything down the seam of this firewall. Now, saying that, this firewall might have to be modified for the modern driveline down the road. The owner already told me we might have to bend or cut the lip. I will deal with that issue when it arises. Right now, we are going to just put the factory car back together the way it would have been built, weld everything up, and then come back through and then slightly modify it. I know if you watch our floor pan video, we didn't do that on the transmission cross member. That would have been a harder part to separate than taking apart or cutting a couple spot welds on a pinch weld seam right here. So I work my way from the center of the firewall down to one side, work my way from the center down to the other side. I walked on the outside of the frame rails, and now just for ease of access, I'm working my way right up the firewall onto the side cowl panels. Once I'm happy with that and that area is welded, we'll turn our attention to the other side, and then we'll go ahead and we are going to seam weld the firewall to the floor pan. Again, this is the same concept on the mini tubs and the wheelhouses, that I just feel it's an area that water gets in there. I've seen these cars, factory chargers that come in the shop before, that you could stick your pinky finger down there. There's a 1/4-inch gap or something like that sticking on the end. So some of them didn't fit well from the factory. This one obviously I think lines up very well. What we're going to do now, we're going to strengthen it even up more and prevent water by coming through by just MIG welding the whole thing. So what this is also going to help us if we do have to cut the lip from the inside with the modern drive line going in this car. It won't be a big deal knowing that everything is also completely welded. Once we're done welding that part section of the firewall, we'll turn our attention to the side cowl panels, and we're going to start MIG rosette welding all these areas. What we are going to do, we use as much vice grips as we can, clamping everything tight. We're confident now, since already the lower cowl panel has been fit, the upper cowl panel has been fit. I'm using the same screw holes, and I will say off camera, I did put the lower cowl panel in place in this fitment, the final fitment of everything, really quick. I just test fitted in there, making sure everything was gonna align properly. We didn't miss anything. Since I'm happy with that, we come back through and MIG rosette holes all these areas. So we're just welding everything in here right now, and the reason we're doing it right now is just ease of access. You could see how comfortable I am welding. I don't have to go on my back. This goes the same for as we're cleaning up with the grinder. You'll see in a minute. Obviously, everywhere I weld with the spot welder, we leave that alone. Like so, this door jamb area, especially an area someone's going to see, we'll just use the spot welder on that, and we don't have to worry about cleaning it up. But going down the inside of those side cowl panels, and obviously there's a kicker panel there and everything to cover it up, so you're not going to see it anyway when this car's said and done. But we're going to go ahead, we can clean those up without going underneath the lower cowl panel. So that's why we went ahead and just welded everything up here, is for ease of access. We'll go ahead and take an 80 grit on a belt sander, and I just like this mini belt sander. So to me, you can use a grinding rock, you can use, surface prep disc. There's so many different things you can use for this job. I feel with the belt sander, yes, we do go through more belts. However, I can really fine tune and only sand the areas where we're trying to focus on, where even with, grinding stone, you seem to gouge into the metal a lot more. Again, a lot of this will be covered up on the 2K, but I've said this on previous videos, we don't send the cars out in anything but epoxy primer for the grand scheme of things. So you're going to see any deep sanding scratch or anything else like that. So like I said, we'll do the 80 grit on the belt sander. We'll take the surface prep disc on 120 grit usually, and then we come back through it with the DA sander with an 80 grit and kind of just smooth most everything out on the metal areas that we worked, and then it's ready for epoxy primer. We try not to mess with the parts that are already sandblasted and just leave that perfect sandblast texture with our medium grit glass that we're using to just remove everything else. That's a good adhesion or tooth that they put in for the epoxy primer. It works really well for us. So as you can see, we are installing the lower cowl panel right now onto the firewall. Again, I told you this was already test fit a little bit ago before we welded and ground down the side cowl areas, and you could really see right now how much harder it would have been to get under there to grind the areas. Not saying it's unable to be done. However, like I said, if we can make an area in this process that's easier for us, we're going to go ahead and do this. Now that everything's clamped on the lower cowl panel, we're going to come back through. This is an area I can hit with all of the spot welders, so this really is going to need no cleanup time as far as grinding, sanding, and everything else like that. I will say on the upper cowl panel, we are going to drill rosette holes, and we are going to do that on the second portion after we do our epoxy primer. Really, you could see right now we can get in here and we can cover this whole entire lower cowl panel with epoxy primer. It's been sandblasted down. This is an area that water comes into, and this is an area on most of the Mopars that rust really bad, and realistically the GM cars, the Ford cars, I've done some Mustangs and stuff that this area rusts out really bad too. But so saying that, what we're going to do, we are going to put our water protection epoxy primer in there. That its one job is to stop corrosion. So the best way to do that is epoxy primer with it off the car. So like I said, you'll see down the road when we do the upper cowl panel, I did drill the rosette holes just because I don't want to spot weld through 3 panels. So we are going to finish up all these little brackets, and then this car, what you're looking at right here, will go into the booth for epoxy primer. With the upper cowl panel, we did sandblast again both sides of the upper cowl panel. What we'll do, you're going to see, we'll tape off the upper cowl panel with the weld through primer on the areas we are going to weld, and those will be MIG welded, and then that underside of the cowl panel will also be epoxy primed off the car. Now that that's epoxy primed, the backside, the lower cowl panel is epoxy primed on the inside of it. When I mate them together, now we have the ultimate coverage protection with epoxy primer, and then we could put them back together. I feel this is a lot easier to do as far as getting the best coverage for it, and it provides the longevity of the car. It does take a little bit longer because there's an extra step versus just throwing epoxy primer and weld through primer in those areas. So that's something that we try to do here. If it takes a little bit extra time, it helps with the quality, we will do that in a heartbeat. We're going to put these lower cowl panel dash support brackets under the charger. Once we're done with that, we are going to turn our attention to the lower trunk drop-offs. You can see these align with the mini tubs, the outer wheelhouses of the charger. We're just making sure they fit. They're going to go right across the cross rail that we installed on this car. Everything on these parts fit really good. What I'm not going to do is the areas that have the MIG rosette holes in the back with the cross rail, we are not going to set those, or the areas on top that I put the MIG holes. That's going to be determined based on where the outer sheet metal quarter panels, where they turn around and the corner caps go on this charger. So if we don't touch those right now, we'll be able to adjust them down the road to get a better fitment width-wise and the adjustment on the quarter cap. So like I said, we're actually just going to weld these to the trunk pan because we know that's the only spot they can be in. They're in line with the wheelhouse and they're in line with the cross rail. So we can come down the line with our spot welder underneath once everything's clamped. You can see with these trunk drop offs too. This goes the same thing I was saying earlier about the Firewall, that these things, they fit really well, but they do need some manipulation. So we will take a jack and a board and we're going to push up and down on them and pry on them a little bit just to make sure they fit up really well against the trunk pan. So this again is something that if your car's on 4 jack stands, it's not going to lift up, it's going to lift up the whole car, and you're not going to be able to manipulate the rear trunk drop offs, where these frame jigs that we build weigh probably 3 times more than these cars. They make them real sturdy. You can jump around them. You can see nothing's moving on these cars. Once we're good and we're happy with the fitment on the trunk drop offs, I come back through with the spot welder, you could see, and just grab it like the factory would right underneath this whole trunk drop off. Now again, there's no cleanup there, and we can turn our attention to the spare tire jack on this car. So you can see right now we're going to put these 3 brackets for the spare tire jack on there. You can see the front part of the jack kind of just sits right in there. There's the spring holder I'm welding on right now, and then the back portion of the jack just fits right in this little bracket right there. So we do have reference marks we took off other cars, pictures we go off of where these gonna go. So there is some give and take. So I don't think these brackets were 100% from the factory. They were hand welded on, but in general this is where they should be. Again, as long as the front sits on there, there is some adjustability on there. We are going to now turn our attention to front steering column bracket. We did come back through with those other brackets, clean them up. We added weld through primer on this section, and now we'll go ahead and clamp this bracket in place, and we will go ahead and just MIG weld it. This is our bracket we could have spot welded. I wasn't sure at the time when we were just holding it up there, so we did drill the MIG rosette holes. We'll come back through again, spot weld it up, no big deal. And this bracket will hold the steering column on the car. Everything's lined up. It really only goes in one spot on this bracket. So we'll come back through. We have to sand down all those areas, for the brackets. There's a couple areas, like I said, we have to clean up. We have to go through the bottom seam of the firewall and floor pan with a DA right now, just to make sure, all fresh epoxy is going to stick to it. We are now going to cut off the frame jig on the front cowl area, just because at this point now it's not doing anything beneficial for us. It's actually more in the way and cumbersome. So removing this bracket jig up here will allow us to have better access while we're priming everything. We don't have to go around everything, and now we could start building off, adding the doors down the road, make sure they fit well. This was just for doing the door jambs, the cowl panel, and holding the A-pillar structure on the car. It's always a really good feeling removing jig pieces from the car, because you feel like at that point the car is really starting to come together, especially once they completely come off the frame jig. At that point you have pretty much a factory car in place. Like I said, now that we're done with removing the jig pieces and everything, we are going to go put 2 coats of white Omni epoxy on this car. So this is going to be the MP171 epoxy, I believe it is. We're going to, like I said, cover the inside of the cowl panel area. If, like I said, the upper cowl panel was on this area and you just had the vents up top, for a fact we couldn't get in there like we do with the coverage we have now. I did tape off all the areas around the lower cowl panel, like I said earlier, where we are going to weld. You could also see there's black seam sealer. I came back through, I did seam seal now 3 days later that the epoxy primer has completely cured, dried. We seam sealed that whole area. Now we can install the upper cowl panel on the rest of the parts that we did fit up. So before we did put this in epoxy primer, I did test fit the upper cowl panel again one more time, just to make sure now that we're in epoxy primer there were no issues. This will follow the same step that the lower cowl panel, firewall, everything else followed. We put it on the car, everything fits good. We use a ton of clamps on this thing just to make sure everything's cinched down. We are going to come back through, you'll see, and once we get everything clamped up and we're happy where it fits, and we're going to start MIG welding the top area. This is 3 layers of metal. I just want a good weld on there, so we just MIG rosette hold the spot of the cowl panel where we're not affecting the rest of the panels, and then we'll just spot weld those areas in there and work our way right down. Now, saying that, if I have an owner, this isn't one of the cars since it's more of a pro touring style build, but if I have a car that's worried more about a factory look on this area, we can come back through once we're done cleaning up and re-spot weld these areas. It'll increase the welds, of course, but it'll also give more of that factory spot weld look. And what I would do in that situation, because you could see with these MIG welds, we add so many more MIG welds than the factory would have had. And that's the same thing you'll see in a second when we start spot welding the back of the dashboard. But on this front section, if I know the owner is looking more of a factory looking car, I'll come back through it once it's cleaned up and we'll space out the spot welds where the factory would have about put them to make them look more like the car hasn't been touched. Obviously, throughout this car, there's so many other signs that show that this car, obviously, everything has been aftermarket. And again, this is what we want to do. We want this car to be an over-engineered, overbuilt 1969 Charger. And again, this is why if you're looking at the spot weld right now, the spot welder on the upper dash cowl panel area, you know, lower cowl to upper cowl on the inside, we're overkilling all the spot welds. We're coming back through, we're hitting this thing hard. So if the owner puts more horsepower, more engine, better driving on this car, there's less rattles, there's less of a chance of them coming apart. I've seen these cars where, you know, we start cutting them apart and the spot welds aren't very well. They break apart real easy, other parts of the car cracked and everything else. So we are trying to make this car last for decades and decades to come. So let's go ahead and finish out this welding. Let's start wrapping up this video and do a walk around on the work that we've accomplished on this short amount of time.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up this video on the 69 Charger with the upper cowl, lower cowl, the firewall, the side cowls, and the front door hinge pillar post install, along with the mini tubs and drop-offs. Obviously, like I said on the intro of the video, and you saw, the mini tubs are just screwed into the car until we test fit the quarter panels and we're happy where everything else sits on it. The trunk drop-offs, the trunk extensions in the back, the drop-offs, they are also just welded to the trunk floor. Like we said, we'll have some adjustment on there in the future. But walking around this car, looking at the rest of the work we did, everything's sealed up in epoxy primer. Like I said, you saw I did weld this area with the MIG welder, and we did not epoxy it since then. I just came through with some weld through primer and just put it on there. Just so for now, we obviously still have to add the front inner fenders, the brackets up on the top of the cowl panel. There is a bunch more welding that will be done on this car. So what we'll do is, after we do the inner fenders, the radiator support, and all the parts up here on the inner structure and the engine bay, then we'll come back through and we'll epoxy prime this whole area one time. So like I said, everything else on this car, it's starting to come together. It doesn't completely look like a Charger, but you're starting to see some of the shape. I did remove the rear supports too. You could see now this car is about as solid as it comes, you know, so it's attached to the frame jig, held from the base up. We don't need any other jig pieces front to rear. So really what we're worried about now are just the front frame rails being held down and everything else like that. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Like I said, it was a quick, short video on putting together. That's how we're doing this whole car, one section at a time. You saw first video was the frame rail sections. Second video, as far as the assembly parts of this car, were the floor pans, trunk pan. Now we did the cowl panel, trunk extensions. On the next video, more than likely we'll start test fitting some parts. We will put the doors on the car first. Those are step one. We might test fit the rear sheet metal, kind of just throw it on there, make sure everything works good. And while we do that, we will, as far as welding and assembly and the video, the next full video will be on the front. Like I said, the inner fenders, the radiator support, will bolt the fenders on the car and kind of get this aligned with the doors and everything else. So stay tuned for that. We are going to do obviously some test fitting first, so we'll kind of do all that and then we'll film it the same way we did on this one. So we will be coming out with another video shortly on this Charger. Hopefully you like this kind of videos. We will post this stuff on Facebook first, so please check it out on Carthage Classic Cars on Facebook. Please like, comment, subscribe to the YouTube channel. This is a big build we have going on. We plan on filming the whole entire process, not really skipping over anything. It might be a quick rundown of the whole process, but if you're building a B-body, Mopar, this will be kind of the same steps as you would take on most of them. Obviously, there's going to be some charger specific stuff in the rear sheet metal on this car, but in general, right now, all the B-bodies for the most part would go together the same way. So like I said, if you don't like chargers, I mean, who doesn't like chargers? But if you don't like chargers, we do have other projects that we have filmed in the shop. We got some GM cars going on, and then there is a couple Mopars that we also post on the YouTube channel. One day we will have a Ford in this shop and we will film on that, but right now, just GM and Mopar. So stay tuned for more videos. I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. Like I said, we'll see you on the next time on this video or another one. Stay tuned.